Hello, I'm your instructor, Bernard Norcott-Mahany, and I thought it might be a good idea just to do a very brief video lecture on some things you might want to consider as you're reading the Aeneid and thinking about Virgil's epic poem. So first of all, the author is Publius Vergilius Maro, known as Virgil. He was born in 70 BCE and he died in 19 BCE. So we actually have, I think, the day that he died. We might even have the day that he was born. So we have pretty exact figures on Virgil. Virgil composed only 3 works in his lifetime. The Aeneid was the last and the greatest. Prior to that, he had written the Georgics, which is about a quarter of the size of the Aeneid. And then before that, he had written the Eclogues, which is about a third of the size of the Georgics. So a short poem, then a medium-sized poem, then the epic poem, the Aeneid. So we have his entire poetic corpus. He didn't publish anything else. And in fact, the Aeneid, he had asked for it to be destroyed at his death because it was not finished. And there are some signs where there would at least be additional polish. We seem to have the whole story as far as like the outline of the story goes. So I don't think we're missing any pieces. But what he would have done with some of those pieces is up for grabs. He probably had another half year or a year to work before he had it just right. He lived most of his life under the first Roman Emperor Augustus. In his youth, he actually would have lived under the Old Republic. Julius Caesar gets assassinated in 44 BCE. Then there's a civil war, and Octavian, Mark Antony, and a guy named Lepidus become the rulers of Rome. Lepidus sort of bows out, and then Octavian and Mark Antony are the rulers. Octavian controls Europe, and Mark Antony controls Africa and Asia. Mark Antony hooks up with Cleopatra. They get involved, and it looks like he's determined to actually create a separate state. Another civil war breaks out, at the end of which Octavian is the only one surviving, and he's the one then, of course, who gets to be the ruler. In 27 BCE, he is called Augustus. He's given that title, revered one, and at that point he becomes the first Roman emperor. So Augustus, the first Roman emperor. During his rule, we have peace, and pretty much for the next 100 to 200 years, there's pretty much peace throughout the Roman Empire. There's some pockets of resistance and things like that pop up, but nothing serious. So you have a fairly stable government over a fairly long period. And in Virgil's mind, Virgil's people, Virgil's region had been on the side of Brutus and Cassius against Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus in that first civil war. And Virgil lost his family estate. He ended up getting an estate from when he basically became a proponent of Augustus, and his poetry all is pretty much in favor of the regime. Some people read the Aeneid as critical of the Roman Empire, that the Roman Empire itself is sort of brutal and therefore is itself wrong. The ending of the Aeneid certainly is a problem because it ends so violently, and with Aeneas giving into rage, an emotion that he really has not given into up to that point. So I don't know what to say about that. Virgil does seem to be aware. I think he is in favor of the Roman Empire. I think he's in favor of Augustus, but I think he thinks that comes at a cost. And the cost, of course, is the old Roman virtues of simplicity, those sort of things that have worked for Rome up until around 200 BCE. Those are now pretty much totally gone, and they can't really be quite, recovered. So the heroes in the poem, there are really 3 heroes in the poem. Of course, there's one who is the hero and the guy I think we're supposed to be rooting for, and that is Aeneas. Aeneas is marked by pietas. This is a Latin word. It means sense of duty. So he is dutiful. He knows where his duty lay. And for the Romans' duty always lay in one place, Rome. Right? So just think about that. Just like make Rome great again, right? It's all about Rome. If you are advancing Rome, then you are a patriot and you are exhibiting pietas. If you are getting in the way of Roman advancement in some way, and it might not even be intentional, then you do not show pietas because you don't have that sense of duty, of where your duty lay and then doing your duty. Now, it doesn't mean that Aeneas doesn't slip. The whole Carthage thing is basically Aeneas slipping. And in fact, Aeneas's personal feelings are absolutely clear. Aeneas wants to stay in Carthage. That's what he wants. He did not want to leave. Okay, I'll say that again. Aeneas wants to stay in Carthage. He did not want to leave. The gods told him he had to leave and that he had a duty. And because he has pietas, he exhibits pietas, that's his better nature, I guess, from the Roman perspective, he does his duty. And that seems sort of harsh, and it's certainly tough on Dido, but for a Roman, there's no other choice. For him to stay in Carthage would mean no Rome, and that would be a bad thing if you're a Roman. The other parts of pietas, you show deference to the gods, and you also show care for your family and your friends. So those are also features of pietas. But the main thing is Rome. Dido, the queen of Carthage, the adjective used to describe her more than once is infelix, the unhappy queen, the unlucky queen. She is pretty much an unlucky figure, right? She marries a wealthy guy, but then her brother, who becomes the king of Phoenicia, of Tyre, of the city of Tyre, he basically has the husband killed and tries to get the money, and then Dido manages to rob her brother and make a getaway with a bunch of people, and they make it to Carthage, where she's building a city. And it's impressive, right? What Aeneas sees in Book 1 is very impressive. Would be impressive for anyone. It is especially impressive given that this is a queen acting alone. She doesn't have a husband. Her husband is dead, and she's sworn an oath to that husband. But that could get in the way of Aeneas moving on, and certainly Aeneas stays in Carthage for a year, so he delays sort of the mission for a year, and he has to sort of get moving, and so Dido is in the way, so she has to, in effect, be gotten rid of. But keep in mind that she is in Felix, but she also shows some heroic qualities, right? She's hardworking, at least before she meets Aeneas, and then she, is able to do great things that would be great things even for any male figure. By the Roman perspective, male would be superior to female, but she's a woman doing these things, which makes it even more impressive, right? She tricks or outwits the local male leaders to get Carthage in the first place. So she is an impressive figure. She does heroic things, but then her flaw is she falls in love with Aeneas, and that, of course, disrupts everything. She stops working on the city. She loses her reputation, in effect, because even though she sees it as a marriage, apparently no one else does. So basically the queen is in effect shacked up with Aeneas, and that, of course, doesn't look great. And so it's going to be difficult for her to get her people back in line. And besides, the leaders surrounding Carthage now are going to be angry because this guy came in from outside and succeeded where they had failed, right? Because he basically was involved with Dido, and they feel insulted. They're going to attack. And Dido, in a city that has not been building and fortifying, has basically been lazy for a year, is going to be susceptible to that invasion. So, she's sort of a failed hero, but she is still sort of a heroic figure. And then Turnus, the Italian hero, he's pretty much marked by furor, rage, anger. And of course, we can compare him then to Achilles, right? Because that's Achilles' thing, right? The opening of the Iliad is rage, sing goddess Achilles' rage. The thing about Greek heroes is Greek heroes do extraordinary things, but they aren't necessarily for the good of the community, right? The ego of the hero is often greater than the good of the community, and so if that is injured in some way, then all bets are off. And if you look at Turnus and how he acts and what happens because of the way he acts, he's not entirely sort of in his mind, because he's sort of driven mad by one of the Furies, drives him sort of mad, drives him crazy with sort of revenge and so forth. But it's his pride that's attacked, right? He was supposed to marry Lavinia, and then this outsider comes in, and now he's really upset about all that. He's still a heroic figure. He still shows all these heroic qualities, but he's another figure who's sort of in the way of Rome, and therefore he got to go. He got to go. So, and then finally the gods. So there are three main gods in the poem. There's Juno, who first appears. There's Venus, who is Aeneas' mom, and then there's Jupiter. Juno represents opposition to anything Trojan. She is also has a shrine at Carthage and loves the Carthaginians. She also loves the Italians, and so she hates the Trojans, and she sees the Trojan sort of influx as almost like a disease going to infiltrate and ruin what is great about Carthage and what is great about Italy. And if you sort of pick Juno as a figure that you're looking at, look at especially how she appears in book 12 when she and Jupiter make a deal. The deal basically is that the Trojans are going to give up their name, they are going to intermarry with the Italians, and they are going to become Italians, right? So Troy will truly be dead, something that's said actually in book 2. Someone actually says Troia fuit in Latin. Troy was, right? The day that Troy is being burned to the ground, one of the heroes says to Aeneas, there used to be a Troy, but it's basically, ashes or near ashes now. Well, Juno's condition for sort of her acceptance is let it stay dead. Let it be dead. Let these people become Italians and not hold on to anything of their Trojan background. So there's that for Juno. Venus, of course, is Aeneas' mom, and she is supporting her son. Now, for Venus, because she is a mom, she is for her son, even at the expense of Rome. And so she's been willing to accept a lot of crap on behalf of her son and let a lot of crap happen to her son because of the promise of Jupiter, which was that he will basically found a settlement, and that settlement will last forever, or something along those lines. And so she's upset with the fact that Juno creates a storm in book 1, almost destroys Aeneas and his fleet. They are not destroyed. One ship goes down, but the other 19 survive. But the thing is, they were supposed to get to Italy, and now that's been postponed yet again, and she's really upset about that. And then she's the one who sort of causes Dido to fall in love with Aeneas, and then she and Juno sort of plot to sort of keep Dido friendly to Aeneas. Venus seems to be okay with the idea of Aeneas staying in Carthage. She just wants to keep her son safe, and so she's on Aeneas' side, but she's not fully on Rome's side, right? So both Juno and Venus are sort of they haven't bought into the whole Rome thing yet. And then Jupiter, who provides a sort of balance, is a figure who sort of speaks for fate, and he actually describes like looking in the book of fate, and it's got bronze pages, so we're talking about like bronze plaques that have on it. And what he says he read there was that Aeneas is going to rule for 3 years after the basically the end of the book, and then his son's going to rule for 30 years, and then there's going to be 300 years of the success, and then Rome is going to come out of all of that, and Rome is going to have empire without end. right? That's the sort of thing, which, is a pretty impressive claim since that's being made at the beginning of the Roman Empire. I mean, the Roman Republic was already an empire, but it didn't have an emperor until Augustus. So that changed the government where you have a clear leader like a king. The Roman Republic did not have that. And of course, the problem is, imagine that we have no president, we don't have an executive branch, we just have the legislative branch running things. Even less would get done than currently gets done. And then that's not just with the current president or with any previous president. I mean, that's pretty much the system. That the president really has to advance a lot of stuff if anything's going to get done. The legislature is going to, by its very nature, slow things down, which suited Rome when it was small, not so much when it was larger. I want to say one last thing because I skipped this with regard to Dido. Dido is used by Virgil to bring to mind the figure of Circe from the Odyssey, right? Who hosts Odysseus for a year, and then his men basically tell him, "Hey, aren't we going home?" And then they decide to leave. Here, of course, it's the gods who tell him, "Hey, you got a mission, you got to go." Medea, because she is potentially homicidal, she ends up being suicidal, but she ends up being potentially homicidal, and she does have that drive of Medea. But also, historically, she is meant to recall Cleopatra. Now, why is that sort of important? Because Cleopatra was seen as this beautiful, powerful queen who enticed Mark Antony, who had been a good Roman, to leave his Roman ways in view of something else. And so he basically lost his pietas to Cleopatra. So all of that stuff is sort of going on in the mind of the Roman audience when they're hearing the Aeneid. And I do mean hearing. I mean, he wrote the Aeneid. He was very careful about writing it. He wrote it in bits and pieces over the course of 10 years. But he always wrote it for oral presentation. And the way Romans read, if you were wealthy enough to own a slave, you probably had a slave who could read. That slave would actually read your text to you aloud. So you're always hearing this. You're not actually sitting in front of a book reading silently. The ancient Romans did not know anything about silent reading. It did not exist as a concept. It was a foreign concept. The first reference we have to it is in like 390 or so CE, so quite a bit later than this. And then it was clearly a novel idea. So that's enough because I'm running on to 18 minutes here. I hope that gives you some information. I hope that will help you as you're looking at the paper, getting you started. Good luck on the paper. Remember, it's 5 full pages, so that would be 1,500 words or more. Make sure you have lots of examples from the text to support what you say, because there's lots of stuff in there. And the Aeneid really is great, and I think Lombardo's translation is very readable. I think it makes the Aeneid actually something that you can read and understand, which is no small thing. Okay, good luck.